Welcome everyone. It's time for us to have a bit of a chat about Starfield because yes, I recently finished this game and it's been a while since I started. Let's just say it became 98 episodes of around 1 hour each. So yeah, quite an extensive playthrough. And yet I didn't do everything you could have done. So yeah, we're gonna talk about that. And yes, as this is one of the slightly larger titles that I've played, I thought that I would have a bit of a chat about it because I think it deserves a bit of a attention, so to speak. And I suppose that the big thing that we are going to talk about is the thing that, well, almost everyone talks about, which is, of course, the game engine. And the thing is, a lot of the things that I have thoughts about sort of always comes back to the game engine in some ways. There are also other things, however, not just the game engine, that we will sort of get to. But yes, indeed, why don't we start immediately? And I'm gonna say also, I'm gonna preface it the same way I prefaced the entire series, which is that I am a bit of a Bethesda fanboy. I'm not gonna deny that. I do like Bethesda's titles. And, well, I decided to label this video Starfield is a great game. ... maybe question mark. Which is sort of where I am with almost all of their titles, which doesn't really make sense then that I am a fanboy, because why the hell would I be if that is what I think about the games? But like a lot of people who play, for example, Skyrim and Fallout 4, there's just something, there is that little something that just makes it interesting to play. I don't know what it is, but it's there. But yeah, just want to make sure that we are sort of on the same page here. Doesn't mean that I don't have critiques of the game, let me just tell you that. So, why don't we just sort of start with, indeed, the game engine. Now, here's the thing. I thought, and I was probably a little bit misled by Bethesda, because as far as I'm aware, it was Starfield and not Elder Scrolls 6. I think it was Starfield that was supposed to have Creation Engine 2. And it's just not. It's the exact same engine as they ran Morrowind in, basically. Or it's some sort of Frankenstein's monster. They've just slapped on some things that potentially made difference here and there, but for the most part, it's the exact same engine as they've always been using. And now, in this day and age, it's started to become an issue. I mean, back when Skyrim released, which is, what is that now, 9 years ago? That game engine still held some sway, so to speak. It was still okay for a mid-2010s, but now that we're getting into the mid-2020s, it just doesn't cut it anymore. It really doesn't, and comparing to other games of the time, so to speak, let's, for example, talk very much about Baldur's Gate 3. We're not going to talk very much about Baldur's Gate 3, but we're going to talk about it in terms of storytelling, because that's a pretty damn important bit for a Bethesda game. So, yeah, the game engine, it's just not good. But here's the thing, it's not just about the game engine, the things that people generally have a problem with. It's also design choice, and that is something I'm going to bring up from time to time here, I think. Now, where should we specifically begin? Well, we can begin with something that Bethesda always does really, really, really well, and they've done it really, really, really well in Starfield as well. I'd argue that they're one of the best in this, actually, which is inorganic scenes, or inorganic locations, so to speak, or level design, etc., etc. Basically, the visuals, and not organic stuff, that is to say, trees and plants and stuff like that, because they're terrible at that, but stuff like assets, buildings, stuff like that. And yeah, Starfield, really, really damn good. Now, one thing that's obviously different from previous games is that the texture quality has gone up quite a lot. I have been amazed several times during the playthrough of just how amazing certain things look. Like the first time I saw Vasco and the textures on him, and just not just the quality of the textures, but also the actual texture, that is to say, the design of the texture. Ooh, that was a bit amazing, not gonna lie. But yes, indeed, Bethesda really has a knack for just spaces, if you would. And again, really, really good in Starfield. However, here's the thing: because of the game engine, they have issues. Because this is something that I've been mentioning several times during the playthrough, which is that where are all the people? And not only that, but where are all the people living? Where are all the people working? There's just not enough space. If you go to New Atlantis, a city that's supposed to be like this very high-tech, very cool, everyone goes there sort of a place, there's like how many places are there? I actually, you know what, now that I say it, did I ever go to the proper residential place, like where the residents actually live? Well, yes, my parents lived there, so I did go there. You didn't get to go to like every floor, that's true, but how many living spaces are there in New Atlantis? I'm gonna argue below 30. Or maybe I'm gonna be generous and say 100 between both the top side as well as the well. But here's the thing. There should be millions living in New Atlantis. It's the humanity's new home, and it's been around for hundreds of years, if I'm not incorrect. I'm blanking a little bit on the history of New Atlantis, but we do know that there have been several generations by the time that the story takes place. So where are all the people? At this point in time, there should be many, many people. Considering the architecture of New Atlantis, it wasn't like 5 people who built that. There must have been thousands of people who just built the city. Where did all of those people go? And everyone aren't just construction workers. Anyway, that was a side point, but the point remains that because of the limitations of the game engine, cities are just not that big. And we've seen this previously as well. We can take Skyrim for an example. When you come to Whiterun the first time and you start walking through the city, this is supposed to be quite a big city. And how many buildings are there where people live? Is it 6 buildings or something like that? So 6 or 7 maybe families live in this city. That's not a whole lot. And this is indeed a problem, I think, to some degree for Starfield. Because there aren't that many larger settlements. We have New Atlantis, we have Aquila City. Neon could pass for a settlement, sort of. I mean, people do live there, I suppose, but other than that, there aren't really that many larger settlements, so they ought to have been able to build up those quite a lot more. Yeah, New Atlantis is tiny. It's built on like it's built vertically a lot, tall buildings and everything, but yeah, it's just not big. It looks good, but it's very, very small. And talking about Aquila, by the way, wow, that is a really, really nice looking city, and it actually feels kind of big, but I would venture if you had an aerial view of it, it would still not be that big. So still, yeah, this is an issue. And this is an issue straightly coming down from the game engine. The game engine is simply not capable of having larger cities, because it would just not work. And that's one thing. We can swiftly go over to another issue, which is sort of vaguely related, and that is, of course, our dear friend, the loading screen. There are loading screens up the wazoo in Starfield. And again, in a modern game, that just doesn't cut it anymore. Now here's the thing, and this is a critique that's been floating around, I suppose, about the game, so I'm gonna come back to the loading screens, because I'm now gonna diverge a little bit from that, and talk a bit about what Starfield is. A pretty big divergence here, but bear with me, because we're sort of gonna come back to the loading screens, it's sort of related. So Ron Howard, I believe, said at one point that Starfield was going to be sort of like Skyrim in space. And what is Skyrim? Well, it's a game with a large open world. You go around it, you find things, you find caves here, a building there, etc., etc. A lot of the fun parts of Skyrim is the exploration. You don't know what you're going to find. Is it going to be a secret path to the place that I now blank on the name of? Shadow Reach? No, it's not Shadow Reach. You know the cave with all of the red Nern roots. There we go. That space. You know which one I mean. So, for example, the exploration is such a key element. So when Ron Howard says that Starfield is going to be like Skyrim in space, people are expecting there to be actual exploration, which there isn't. There's no exploration in Starfield. Yes, you can drop down on any point on a planet, like any pixel you can click on a planet that is land, you can land on, and you will get a map that you can explore, but it's all procedurally generated. There's absolutely nothing nothing prepared, if you would. Granted, a lot of the celestial bodies that you do go to will have preset places, and I really did not visit a lot of those because I just didn't really feel like it. But I suppose those will at least be sort of unique, maybe. I mean, how much is one science station gonna differ from another science station? I don't know. But at least you have a proper location. If you just drop down anywhere, there's just gonna be random structures here and there. Sure, you can explore those if you want to, but it's just not gonna be that interesting, I don't think. So, with that said, for me personally, when I started playing the game and I sort of figured what the game was about, I realized that that's just not what the game is. And I was okay with that. And now we come back to the loading screens, because a lot of people have complained a little bit about, well, I say a little bit, probably a lot, about the fact that there are loading screens when you are in space, when you travel between systems completely, and when you travel between, the celestial bodies, etc. People complain that there are loading screens. I'm okay with those loading screens, because here's the thing, the game is not No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky functions differently. No Man's Sky is also an exploration game, but much like Starfield, No Man's Sky, you don't really need to explore down on a planet, because, again, it's all just procedurally generated. Sure, you can find certain things in that game, but there's no proper places. I know it's a bit different now than what it was from in the beginning. In the beginning, there was absolutely nothing. Now there are at least some locations which you can get markers for and stuff like that. But going back to Starfield, there are more things to find. It's just that you have to go to specific locations. So I'm okay with the whole fact, or the whole thing about fast traveling between places. I don't see that as a big problem. I also don't see Starfield as an exploration game on the surface. You have the locations that you go to, you do those locations, and then you're done. Is this what people wanted with Starfield? Maybe not, but it is what Starfield is. So to try and compare it to Skyrim and say that Starfield is worse because it's not like Skyrim, I'm sorry to say, but I don't think that is a good critique of the game, because they are not the same. They are just not the same. And if there ever is a Starfield 2, hopefully people will know what Starfield 1 was, so they will not expect it to be what it isn't. So going back, we were talking about loading screens. Those loading screens I'm okay with. The loading screens down on the land, I am not, because now we're getting back to modern games. Because if you take a game like Night City, a game like Cyberpunk 2077 that takes place in Night City, it is a game where you can almost play the entire game without a single loading screen. It isn't 100% true, because certain missions require you to wait, and you will get a loading screen for the game to sort of load up the scene, if you would. But for the most part, you can move anywhere you want without a single loading screen. That is to say, going into buildings, up, down, etc., etc. In Starfield, much like any other game from Bethesda with an open world setting, there are loading screens everywhere. And the weird thing is that it isn't always a loading screen. So we can go back to New Atlantis, for example. You arrive at the port. You walk up the little slope up to the sort of, what is it? Merchant area. That's a weird way to say it. But basically you have a one of the Terra Brew, is it? I think. Another little shop. Those you can just walk into. No worries. There aren't even doors. You just walk into them at your own leisure. But then you come to the medical place, and all of a sudden there's a door. And you go in that door, and there are 2 rooms behind the door and 1 person. That's it. Why did you need the loading screen to go into that room? It's the limitations of the game engine. There we go. It's all gonna come back to that, almost all of it. But here's now where I bring in the design elements of this game, because I think, I can't verify this, so if anyone want to comment, if I'm wrong, sure, do that. But I'm pretty sure that one of the reasons is objects. So if you look at New Atlantis, for example, the outside of New Atlantis, there aren't that many sort of loose objects, if you would. So things you can pick up, slash steal, slash do whatever you want with. There aren't that many of them. But if you go into, I think I'm gonna be a little bit defensive here about the medical place. I don't remember how many loose objects there were in there. But that is one of the reasons, because there's also another shop in New Atlantis where you sort of move between. I think, is it between masked and commercial or something like that? There's a little shop, a completely pointless shop. I don't think anyone has ever bought anything from that shop. Also has a loading screen, you go in, it's a tiny little room with 1 person, but quite a lot of objects that you can pick up. And I think that the whole point of that loading screen is because there are a bunch of objects, and the more objects you put into the game via whatever world editor that they're using, it's gonna cause problems. So therefore, they need to hide all of those stuff between loading screens. And that is a design choice. And the design choice here is items. Like, many items in this game could just be scrapped totally. And I'm gonna diverge now once more and talk a bit about objects. Because in Fallout 3, if we go back that long, you had junk items. Generally only there for you to be able to sell, get a few caps, whatever. So in Fallout 4, they thought a bit about this, I assume, and said to themselves, what can we do about junk items? Well, how about we have base building? And what about if every single junk item was made up by components? And those components are what you build your settlements with. Awesome, good job. You've corrected the fact that junk items on, a pretty large hand, so to speak, are completely useless. Yes, you can get caps for them, but other than that, it's completely useless. Now in Fallout 4, all of a sudden, they have a usage again. Going now over to Starfield, which is... I know that Ron Howard said it was Skyrim in space. I think it's more like Fallout 4 in space, but whatever. It has these junk items, almost exactly the same junk items as they have in Fallout 4, as a matter of fact. And now they're junk items again. Completely pointless. And they're not even interesting enough to pick up for selling. I mean, I've never had to pick up junk items in Starfield in order to make money. Not a thing that happens. So why do they exist? Why, Bethesda, did you think that it was important to have junk items in this game when they serve absolutely no purpose? Yeah, again, that's not... It's related to the game engine, but it's more of a design choice. Bethesda needs to have their junk items, and sometimes there's just so damn much of them, it's weird. And they don't really add anything as actual items. They add something to the scene, absolutely, but you didn't need to have them be individual items. They could just have been part of the scenery, and no one would have cared whatsoever. So for future games, I really hope that is what you're gonna go for. We don't need another Skyrim where you go into a room and there's a table full of 30 different items just because you need to make sure that everything looks cool. Just make them part of the scene, so to speak, is what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's just... I don't know what to say about that, really, more than that. But going back to loading screens and design choices, and potentially also game engine, there are other loading screens that I don't buy, and those are certain elevators. So there are 2 of them that I can think of. There might be more, but we have one, for example, if we go over to Cydonia, one of the first places you do visit, as part of the main story, if I'm not incorrect. When you come down to the sort of central hub area, where all of the shops and places are, there's an elevator that will take you from that area down to the floor where all the miners are. And if you go into that elevator, you click the button, there's a loading screen. Granted, it's not the longest loading time, that's absolutely true, but there is a loading screen. However, you could also just take the stairs and go down to the exact same place. You can probably even jump off the ledge and fall down. You might take a bit of damage, but it would probably even be faster than taking the elevator. But these two places, entry to the elevator and exit from the elevator, those are in the same space. So why the loading screen? And I think that it's a two-parter. I think it's one, because of the game engine. I think there is some sort of limitation where they physically cannot have a moving elevator. I don't 100% trust that, because there are parts in Starfield that moves. Like, for example, if you remember when I infiltrated, I think it was part of the Rejuven quest or mission, when you are supposed to get one of the little gangways, I think it's called, to be in positions you can use it. I think that moves. So I'm pretty sure they can have moving objects, but I am also a little bit unsure whether or not they can have a moving elevator, like a proper functioning elevator in this game engine. That's one part. The other part is that I think it's, again, a design choice. I literally think that someone said, hey, we are gonna have a button that you press, you fast travel to the other location. I'm not sure that that is correct, but it is. It's just weird. The other elevator is obviously in Neon, in the Astral Lounge. There's an elevator to get up to the VIP rooms. A really, really short ride. It's a loading screen. But when you get to, if you want to, the DJ booth, you can just jump down from the DJ booth, down onto the dancing floor, which is where the elevator is. Again, completely pointless. You could just have an elevator ride, like in Cyberpunk. It works really, really well. It's immersive, etc., etc. And again, I feel that there is someone who really, really wants to stick to how they've always done things, instead of just making sure that the game is more completely blank there, sorry, more modern, basically. And it's just odd to me that they've done that. So yeah, all of this part of my little section, so to speak, about spaces, really well made, absolutely, but the game engine breaks immersion all the damn time, and it's just not a good fit, so to speak. So I kind of want to move on from that to less inorganic stuff and more organic stuff with regards to the story, and more importantly, I suppose, storytelling. Because having played Baldur's Gate 3, and you know what, in fact, Cyberpunk 2077 as well, it is clear that Bethesda has now fallen way behind on the storytelling, and that's a problem, because Bethesda's strong suit up until now has always been the storytelling. And here's the thing, I still think that the stories and the dialogues, etc., of Starfield are good. There's a lot of it, and sometimes a little bit too much. Some people might be a little bit too dialogue-y, if that's a word, by which I mean they talk a little bit too much. But for the most part, everything is just really well presented with regards to, indeed, dialogues and characters and stuff like that. But the point is, and here's a big thing about the game, which is it doesn't have custom animations. Now, you might not think that that is a big thing, maybe, I don't know. It obviously hasn't been in their previous titles, but it's starting to become an issue. Because if you look at Baldur's Gate 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm bringing these up not only because I've played them very recently, I'm currently playing Cyberpunk 2077. It's just the fact that these two games have a certain way to tell the story that's in the game, or whichever story it is. So they work differently. Baldur's Gate 3 has a more of a standard classic RPG perspective to it, which is that you move about in a space. It's not first person or anything like that. You click on a character in order to talk to them, but when you do, you get into a proper dialogue. More or less exactly the same as what they did in Fallout 4, which is to have different camera angles working. And unlike Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield doesn't have custom animation. And for me, having now played those two games, Baldur's Gate 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, that is now very apparent, or very apparently, a bad thing. Because the way that it works in, for example, Baldur's Gate 3 is that every single conversation you have, every single dialogue has custom animation. Not so much for the main character, I'm gonna be honest and say that. Main character has a fair amount of standard poses, which is a thing, but the people that you talk to, 100% custom animations. Of course, there's certain smaller characters that you might not even have a dialogue with, that they might only have one liner of dialogue or something like that. Very often they basically just stand there and do their line and nothing more. But for all of the other slightly larger dialogues that exist in the game, custom animation. And let me tell you, Baldur's Gate 3 has a lot of animations and a lot of dialogues, etc., etc. So Starfield and Bethesda should really have been able to do that too. And for a lot of these, a lot of the situations in Starfield, it just becomes very clear that this is lacking. And I probably have a lot of examples for this, but I have a very prominent one, which is the attack on the key. So the hunter comes, he attacks the key, wants something, locations for artifacts or something like that, I don't know. And when you get there, we know that, Barrett dies. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't played the game yet. And Sarah, who's obviously very upset about this, what does she do? Well, she runs up to Barrett, stops at about 1 or 2 meters away, and does nothing as far as the body goes. She basically stops, does nothing, sounds upset, obviously, sounds distraught, but she doesn't do anything. She doesn't, kneel down, she doesn't go over to him. She basically stands and looks at him and is upset. But this is also a bit weird. And not that in particular, but Starfield is a bit weird here because at the very end, if you remember, one of these sort of, I can't say flashbacks because they're not necessarily back, flash sideways maybe. One of them takes you to the key, but instead it's Vladimir holding you, which is a bit weird in some cases, but, part of the multiverse and everything. That has a custom animation. He is sitting on the floor, cradling you, and when he stops, there's clear motion, and it's a bit of ragdoll physics and everything when he gets up. So why only that time? Because that's almost the single time that there is custom animation, as far as I've been experiencing anyway. There have been some situations where there have been some. Wow. For example, I remember Walter Stroud when he met his wife over at the company. When you were done talking, they sort of moved to the side and started talking between themselves. There was animations there for that. So they've done a little bit of it, but not much. And when the game launched, when I started doing the series, we only had the sort of close-up facial cam. And there's obviously a reason for the fact that they have that cam, which is that it hides the need for doing custom animations, because if you're locked in a face cam, obviously that character can't just start walking around, because it's going to be a problem for the dialogue. But when they added the option to remove the face cam, so you're sort of locked into the dialogue, but then you can freely move the camera, and you didn't close up on characters, all of a sudden it became very clear that there aren't any custom animations. Because now characters are simply standing right up and down, they're not moving, they're not doing anything useful with their hands. And if they do something with their hands, it's basically just a certain pose that they will not stop doing. And it's just Compare that then to Cyberpunk 2077, which is completely first person, and every single dialogue that you have there, again with obviously larger dialogues or more important dialogues. Again, custom animations, all of it. You have characters jumping over desks, you have characters emoting 100% in line with what they're saying. Granted, Cyberpunk 2077 has a slight issue with facial animations. It's not very prominent in that game. Very much more so in Baldur's Gate 3. But still, compare that now to Starfield, a supposedly very modern game, and it just feels extremely dated. And this is something that they're gonna have to fix. But they're not gonna. It's gonna be exactly the same in in Elder Scrolls 6. 100% the same. And it's starting to tug a little bit at my fanboyism. It is. I'm not gonna lie. It's gonna be a problem for me. I'm probably gonna accept it still, but it is gonna be a problem. So they really need to look at both of those games, but obviously also other games. So for example, I think it's clear that it has to be slightly more close to Cyberpunk 2077 in that mainly dialogues need to be free movement. You need to be able to move about even though the dialogue is happening, even though dialogue choices come up, you should still be able to move about. And sure, what Cyberpunk 2077 does is that they have situations where you like sit down, for example. If you sit down, well, then you're locked in the dialogue there. You can't move about freely anymore. And very often that is to paint a picture. That is to set a scene. Because now you're locked in a certain angle, you can move the camera. You can't move the camera freely in these situations, but you can move it a little bit. And very often what they do with that is they actually use that for the storytelling. So very effective way to do that. So if I had to choose either Baldur's Gate 3's way of doing it or Cyberpunk 2077's way, it would have to be Cyberpunk. So hopefully Bethesda does something with that. But again, I think that this is largely a challenge with the game engine. So again, we come back to the game engine. They cannot keep doing this. They need to change. Either create their own brand new game engine or use something that already exists. That would be the absolute best. But there we go. I think I talked as much as I want to about these things. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the story, specifically the main story. I can, however, start talking a little bit about the other stories, because for the sort of how the game is set up, you have certain larger factions that you do stuff for. You have the UC, you have the Freestar Collective, you have the Crimson Fleet, and you have Ryujin. Out of those three, Ryujin is the weirdest one because it's just a company. I don't 100% understand why Ryujin, what the decision was there, or who made the decision to have Ryujin be one of the larger factions, because it's just basically a company on Neon, among other companies. Sure, it's the largest one, but still, it's just a company. It's kind of weird. But anyway, I did think that it was a fun one, though. Gotta be honest, I did think it was a fun one, and it did present the player with some more choices in the end, with the neural lamp that you could manipulate people with. I obviously chose to have it, and as the game told me in the very end, people really like it, because they can't really say anything else, which is a bit horrifying, but I made that choice, okay? It's fine. But yeah, as for those faction missions or faction quest lines, I thought that they were fine. They were fine. They were different enough to be unique, separate from each other. And obviously, I think that the UC probably was the better one, because of the fact that, you know, terramorphs are such a thing. But then also, terramorphs aren't such a thing outside of that quest line, so to speak. I think I found like one, possibly two terramorphs outside of that quest line. So terramorphs weren't such a big thing, indeed, outside of it. So they probably should have added a few more terramorphs here and there, I think. Maybe. But going back to the main story, and I think it's sort of the same as it is in a lot of Bethesda's games, which is that the main story is very short. Very, very short. You can probably do the main story in just a few hours and then you're done. If you skip all of the factions and stuff like that. It's not a lot. Like, you gather a few artifacts, you gather a few powers. There's the whole business with the hunter. But not much more. And then you're done. It's a bit weak. And also, this might be just my understanding of it, but it kind of feels like the screwed the pooch with regards to the whole story and how it works. Or either that, or I just did not understand it. But the story, of course, is that there's a multiverse. And in each of these multiverses, apparently just in our galaxy, because I think that we are still just in the Milky Way. I don't think that we are traveling galaxies, are we? Pretty sure we're... Because the grav drive obviously only goes like at the max 35 light years. And where's the Andromeda Galaxy? How many light years away is that? Like several million or something? I don't know. Really, really far away. Well, actually not millions probably, but a long way away. So yes, we are just in the Milky Way Galaxy. And apparently in the Milky Way Galaxy, in each of these multiverses, there are artifacts and temples. Alright, so we have a hunter who at some point in some of the one or two or three why did I say that? What I meant is that the hunter, whoever he is, Barrett in the local multiverse, so to speak, at some point found enough artifacts. As part of Constellation? Maybe. Potentially. Found all the artifacts, assembled the armillary, and went to the Unity. Presumably all by happenstance, because obviously he would not have... I say the hunter, it could have been the emissary as well, obviously. Or several people, in fact, now that I think about it. Might not just have been those two. But they go to the Unity, and as I said, presumably just by chance, they had absolutely no way of knowing anything about the artifacts or the armillary. Enough to assume that you could put them together, most likely, but having it on a ship and activating grav drive to get to the Unity, how would they have known that? They couldn't. So presumably they just happened to do it. So they did. They realized that, okay, well, this is cool. They meet up with whoever it was that impersonated me in the end there. The Unity or the creator or something like that. They got the option to become Starborn. And they chose that option, at least two of them. The hunter and the emissary. And then they decided to keep doing it. Why? Well, the hunter said that one of the reasons was when he had done enough, he would be able to go and see the creators. Not 100% sure how he knows that that is a thing. Maybe the person or the thing impersonating me said that. If you do enough, you will get to meet us, maybe. But by his own words, he has done more than 1,000 of these multiverses. Found all the artifacts in more than 1,000 multiverses. I mean, wow. I mean, only assuming that each artifact is in the same location in each multiverse. There's a lot of artifacts, you have to travel quite a lot, you have to do a lot of stuff to actually get to them. And 1,000 of those, that's a little bit weird to my mind. But even if we grant that that is the case, I just, there is just something that nags at me. I'm not 100% sure what it is, but it is, it just doesn't sit right with me story-wise. Now, luckily, I say luckily, I was a bit worried about this, that we would start the next playthrough in the cave, on the lift with Lynn and the guy that you're there with, Hellner, there we go, Lynn and Hellner. That would have been really odd, so I'm really glad that they at least didn't do that. But also, what I did in my, first multiverse as a Starborn, what did I do? I went to New Atlantis. I landed with the Starborn ship. I went to the lodge, said, hey, I'm a Starborn, just, and we're gonna find some artifacts. And they were like, oh, okay, that's cool. Really, really accepting, which is great, but considering what the hunter and the emissary did, which is to say, most likely they knew about me gathering artifacts. Well, obviously they did, because eventually they contacted us. Why didn't they do the same in every single multiverse? Just go to New Atlantis, say hi, go to the lodge, say hi, get all the help they need to get the artifacts, and then they're done. Why the secrecy? Why the... Yeah, exactly. Why the secrecy? Kind of feels weird. And I don't understand it at all, basically. So... But here, alright, I can now get to one of the things that just makes me feel at odds with the story, which is that when we change multiverse... See, here's the thing, here's the problem. The problem with multiverses is time, I think. Because time... Okay, I'm gonna drop a philosophical thought on you, which I don't even know that I have substantial evidence to claim, but I'm gonna say that time doesn't exist. Because we can't, you know, we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't measure it. And before you say that clocks measure time, no, they don't. They approximate time. They do not measure time. I'm gonna pose or posit. Is that how you say it? I think. So anyway, what I'm gonna get at is that time is the issue here, because when we arrived at our new multiverse or new universe as Starborn, somehow we're transported back in time, right? We're transported back in time to basically the same place as we were after having gathered the first artifact. Because what Vasco, I think, was it? Yes, when he scanned us, he said that, this is similar, this character in front of me is similar to the miner on Vectara, was it? That gathered the artifact that sort of, but then basically disappeared, they said, which is very convenient of the game to have the other you disappear. Yep, very convenient. So we are in the same time frame as how the actual game begins, like at the very beginning. And presumably, if we find all the artifacts now in the new universe, we go to the Unity again, we do all the things that we did there, we start a new universe, most likely the game is going to put us in the same place again. Which begs the question, is that the same every single time? So does time not move in these multiverses? Because presumably they move at the same time, as long as they obey the same, you know, physical laws as the universe you start in. Does time not move until you arrive at the very exact same place every single time? Yeah, that doesn't feel like it works. But for the sake of a story in a game, I suppose I can sort of live with that or something. Anyway, what I can say about like other missions and stuff like that is that, as I mentioned before, just writing, dialogues, characters, etc., etc., I think they've been really great. I know that some people think that it isn't, but I think that the writing of Starfield is really, really great. It has always been a bit of a strength of Bethesda to do good writing, both in the dialogues, but also in like terminals and slates and stuff like that. So with that, I don't really have a problem. I do have a little bit of a problem with the fact that it's so much, because it's... Here's the thing, what I would have loved to see is for Bethesda to take around, let's say, 30-40% of the content with regards to stories. Take that time that they have now saved and put that into the remaining 60-70%. Flesh out everything, make it more interesting. Maybe work a little bit on custom animation. That would have made everything even better, the remaining bits even better, because here's the thing, there's so many characters, most likely, that I have not even talked to. I mean, yes, I did sort of the major things, but I left the first playthrough with quite a lot of activities not done, activities that most likely would have generated proper missions, and I didn't do several of the like kiosk stuff. I don't know if those would have generated a whole lot of, let's say, dialogues necessarily. But yeah, I didn't do everything, not nearly everything. So, from my perspective, as someone who's played the game, and let me just check, my first playthrough took me 162 odd hours. And I didn't do everything. What if instead they would have taken a lot of those things, a lot of those outliers that most likely a lot of people will not get to, what if they would have taken those and actually put it into, let's say, the main story, flesh the main story out? I think that a lot of people would have liked that a bit more. So, yeah, for the next game, it would be better, I think, if they indeed try to focus more on the larger stories, or rather make stories be a bit more fleshed out, instead of having a lot of stories. Basically, quality over quantity. I think that that should be a guiding word for Bethesda, or a guiding phrase. Focus more on existing stories instead of adding new ones everywhere, because holy hell is there a lot of stuff in Starfield. And yes, indeed, as I said, there are a lot of places that I did not visit. So, yeah. And you know what? I think that that's about it for this video. I've been talking enough. There are obviously more things I probably could talk to you about, but I think that I covered the things that I have been thinking the most about, the things that I have been having most issues with regards to my indeed Bethesda fanboyism, to sort of try to explain in a way that makes it look good. It has been difficult, let me tell you what. But if we're gonna circle back to the title of the video, Starfield is a great game, maybe. The point is, and I think that this is the same point, maybe, did I say that this at the beginning? I don't know. But I think that this is vaguely true for like all of Bethesda's titles, that there is such a solid foundation, a solid world building. I mean, Bethesda is almost unmatched when it comes to world building, with just how much stuff there is to do, how many people there is to talk to, how many things there are to read. They are almost unparalleled in that. But the game engine stops them from actually taking that to the next level. And the next level would be proper storytelling, because right now they don't have proper storytelling. It's more like almost, reading a visual novel, if you know what I mean. They could just as easily just have had still images with text, and it would have been largely the same. So, yeah, I think that is sort of where I'm landing in, that the foundation of Starfield is great. It's one of the best games I've played, but it's being let down so much by the game engine. And in some cases, as I mentioned, also game design choices. They need to step it up for the next game a lot. And as I said, I played the game for over 162 hours and I didn't even get bored by the end. So again, there is just something about these games that just makes me want to keep playing, and it is very likely that I will do a second playthrough. And maybe a third, and maybe a fourth, and maybe a fifth. We'll see. Kind of depends on, how interested I am. So, yes indeed, that has been my little talk, so to speak, my TED talk about Starfield. And if you agree or disagree or whatever, just let me know in the comments. Why don't you? So after this, we're going to move on to something a little bit lighter, I think. But that is something that's going to come on, I believe, Sunday. So hopefully you look forward to that. For now, though, this has been ghostmutgaming with me, Christopher. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.